Thank you for joining us, and many thanks to at least one of our guests who is up very late to be with us during today's discussion. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Steve Geimann, a former national SPJ president and a retired editor at Bloomberg News. I worked in Washington and for 3.5 years worked in London. Before we start our discussion now, there are some housekeeping items I want to go over. The format of this session is very simple. The guests and I will have a conversation. If along the way you have a question for our guests, please use the Q&A function. I'll be sure to work your questions into the discussion as we go along. Please keep the chat box on Zoom clear. International Community Co-Chair Dan Kubisky will be using chat to post links and additional information related to today's discussion. This talk is being recorded and will be placed on the SPJ International Community's YouTube channel. Dan has posted the link for that in the chat box. You know, journalism has become a hazardous profession. In war zones, in totalitarian regimes, in 2023, the Committee to Protect Journalists said 320 journalists were imprisoned. Reporters Without Borders says 556 journalists are currently being detained. UNESCO says that while reporter murders are down, journalism imprisonment is at a record high. So now let me introduce our guests who have experience with these issues. Alsu Kurmasheva, a dual U.S. Russian citizen, is a journalist and editor at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. She first joined RFE-RL in 1998 as a radio program moderator and is based in Prague, but she's joining us today from New York City. In October of last year, she was detained in Russia on charges of failing to register as a foreign agent, 4 months after entering the country to care for her mother. In December of last year, she was also charged with disseminating false information about the Russian military. This stemmed from her alleged involvement in the distribution of a book based on stories of residents in Russia's southwestern Volga region who opposed the country's invasion of Ukraine. Alsu was held for more than 9 months before she was convicted on the charge of spreading the fake news. She was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. She was released just last month in the prisoner exchange that included fellow American journalist Evan Gershkovich. She will be among 4 recipients of the Committee to Protect Journalists 2024 International Press Freedom Award to be presented in New York City on November 21st. Danny Fenster is the managing editor of Frontier Myanmar, a local news magazine. In the aftermath of the February 2021 coup d'etat, Fenster was detained as he tried to leave Myanmar to go back to his hometown of Detroit. He was charged with incitement for allegedly spreading false or inflammatory information. He became the only foreign journalist to be charged by military authorities. 5 months later, on November 12th, a military court sentenced Fenster to 11 years in prison for sedition and related charges. He was eventually released a few days later after former UN ambassador and New Mexico governor, the late Bill Richardson, engaged in face-to-face negotiations with the commander-in-chief of Myanmar's military. He's now based in Southeast Asia. Good morning and good evening to both of you. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
First question is, how are you both doing?
Also, I'll let you take that first.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you. I'm doing really good. I'm in New York this week for meetings and important events within the UN General Assembly. And yesterday we had really important and interesting and fruitful conversations at the CGI, Clinton Global Initiative events. I'm so happy that security of journalists is raised on and it's been talked from big stages, and people who care. There are more and more people in the government, in people in power, people in businesses who care more and more about journalists. It's very hopeful. Journalism has always been a very dangerous profession, especially for my colleagues and myself at RFE-RL. The world relies on journalists a lot. And if somebody starts thinking, everybody, businesses, governments, we consume news and information, and we, as we drink water and as we have food, right? But we don't think about it. And when somebody is starving, we try to help. But when journalists are imprisoned, most of this is the biggest part of the society thinks it doesn't concern them. It's somewhere far away in Asia, Africa, Russia. It's so far away, and I will go on with my life. But that's not true. That when journalists are imprisoned, it's a very, very dangerous signal that this might come up to you, to your business, to your governmental department or something, and there will be no one to protect you later when something goes wrong with you. So I'm happy to be among people who really listen to us.
Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you've said. I think those are really important themes to highlight. I mean, I think it is, especially for American readers, to really think that these are distant, faraway places, and it sort of doesn't affect their life. And they kind of only hear about it when a journalist that happens to have an American citizenship is detained, and then maybe it crosses their radar. But I think also, as you probably know, and certainly as I know in the Myanmar context, hundreds of local journalists that don't have champions outside of the country fighting for them in the same way. So, constantly thinking about them as well. But yeah, I'm really happy that you're there in New York at the UN, raising this as an issue and keeping it on international leaders' radars. I think the initial question was, how are you doing? I'm doing well. So
good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
So that our viewers and our listeners get a sense of what you guys went through. On the day that you were both taken into custody, were detained, did you have any inkling that was going to be the way that day ended?
Nah, I mean,
Danny, you go ahead. Tell you. I
I'll
really
start
want to hear your story.
Well, just because I know it's probably fresher on your mind than it is on mine. Not that I think I'll ever forget the day, but no, I mean, I didn't expect the day. I was detained in the morning, but I did not expect the day to start that way. There were all indications were that I was not on the government's radar. And so that was quite a surprise when they said they wanted to ask me some questions about an investigation. And that quickly, it quickly became apparent that that was like a sort of a prelude to an inevitable arrest and sort of thrown in front of a judge and charged by the end of the day with a crime. And on the way to the prison, I started realizing that I was probably going to sleep there that night and that I might be stuck there for about 2 weeks. And I went to bed being very angry that I was going to have to wait 2 whole weeks there. I had I had no idea that this would end up being 6 months, and I'm still grateful that it was only 6 months. It could have been a lot longer.
Absolutely, I relate to every word. When I was taken to the detention center, I thought every day later on, I thought, okay, they will come now and say, also, this was a terrible mistake. We are so sorry. We apologize, and you are free to go. And I remember vividly after my first courtroom appearance where they extended my detention. It was December 1st. So it's been a month and a half since I was arrested. After that, I returned to my cell. I sat down on my bench, and I realized, okay, I'm gonna be here for a while, and I set myself a deadline. I love to plan my life, and I know that not everything goes according to my plan. I'm very flexible, but still I like planning, and I planned I said, okay, I was realizing how long it might take to go through the investigation. So I said, okay, 6 months. Also, you have to hold on 6 months of like cold, brutal winter in Russia. And I remember vividly December 1st. I prepared myself for coming 6 months, and it's been more than 9. I'm really lucky. I was lucky that it was only 9. It could have been much longer.
So that's your first day. You're looking down to the road. Danny, I'm curious. You thought you'd be there for 2 weeks. What gave you what made you think it was just going to be 2 weeks?
Well, so also like you said, I think a month into that they extended it. So the way it was explained to me in the beginning was that actually it ended up being a little more than 2 weeks, but that first day my understanding had been in 2 weeks I'll go back to the court to hear a decision that I think was like the decision is if something hasn't happened within 2 weeks, the judge will have to decide whether or not they're going to renew your sort of the order that keeps you there detained. And I was like, okay, well, 2 weeks, I think in 2 weeks, word will get to the U.S. Embassy, and, a couple other foreign journalists had been sort of arrested and quickly quickly deported and sort of kicked out of the country. I was like, okay, so then, if I'm here for 2 weeks, then they'll probably deport me immediately after that. And it was a similar thing. It wasn't a month, it was 2 weeks. But when I went to the court in 2 weeks and I realized what they meant by the word court, which was, clearly not the court of law in the way that I had grown up thinking about it, I was like, I went back and started realizing, all right, I'm going to be here for a lot longer than that. And it like slowly started realizing to ignore these 2 week deadlines that they had sort of every 2 weeks I would have to get the thing renewed. And I just eventually learned to ignore those as any kind of barometer of anything. So that was kind of like where that sort of time frame had come from initially.
For both of you, when did you first hear from somebody from the American government? Was it that first day? Was it?
No, for me, for a couple weeks, I had no idea if anybody knew where I was. I was pretty certain. I kind of assumed that people had probably figured it out, but I had no idea. Um, and then my partner Juliana, people outside can drop off food parcels. So a couple weeks into it, Juliana, or maybe even just a week into it, she had brought a parcel of food and they delivered it to my cell. And so then I at least knew that people knew where I was. But it was about a month before I was able to actually speak to anybody, and that was over the phone. Because it was in the midst of a bad wave of COVID there. So there were no in-person meetings, but within about a month, I think I'd been there for 1 month when I got a phone call, and it was the U.S. Embassy and Juliana, and I think maybe my parents on that first call.
I was treated as a Russian citizen in Russian prison. My captors told me from the very beginning that there will be they will give no access to U.S. consulate officials. And they were seeking access from day one of my arrest. I know that from my lawyer, but the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Russian officials, they denied the access. And I know that they've been seeking access for all the term of my arrest. They were requesting inquiries about my health situation, my conditions. I know that from the prison authorities, from guards. So they got those requests, but they never responded. And as I learned after my release, they sent one report about my health, and it was completely misinformation. They didn't send the actual results of my medical checkups. So I had some medical checkups. I had some medical issues, health issues in prison, but they never reached the American embassy in Moscow.
Did those health issues ever get resolved by the authorities in the prison?
No, they didn't have facilities to resolve that. It was a checkup. They acknowledged me what has to be done when I am released. If something more dangerous happened, they could have sent me to a prison hospital, which I refused at that time. And actually, they were treating me even worse than Russian prisoners, because all other Russian prisoners were allowed phone calls with the family and visits. I was denied all of that.
For both of you, and maybe we start with Alsu on this one, after you got settled in, which is a terrible way to describe the detention, but after you were there for a day or two or 10, who did you talk to? Did you talk to people inside the prison? Were you talking to your handlers? Were you talking to people outside? I think the listeners would like to know, how did you keep your mind stimulated while you were in detention?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the breakthrough was for me after that first courtroom appeal to the December 1st. It opened my eyes, and I started looking around. I was in a solitary confinement, but for two women. So my cellmate was changing all the time. They were changing and bringing new women, and I spent time talking to them, and some of them really told interesting things to me, and I could have seen how and at what point their lives went wrong. And talking to me, they realized, many of them, they said that, well, this is the first time in my life I'm like ever sharing my story, and it was very precious. It was nice. So I talked to them. I kept my diary. I read a lot. I started getting lots of letters in December. My friends and family organized campaign to send me letters. I started getting many letters from all around the world. I got a newspaper subscription, and they were not delivered to me all the time. The prison guards realized very quickly that they could put pressure on me with that. So like they could see how I didn't care about food or any other things, but when the letters and newspapers were not delivered, I was very angry and furious and sad. So they could manipulate on that with me, I prayed, I meditated, I did my yoga exercise. It was a very small solitary confinement for two women with horrible conditions, with a hole in the floor instead of a toilet, very limited showers twice per week, and it was very cold. So those things kept me going. And especially when there is electric kettles were banned in the cell, so we had to boil or warm up water with that wire thing that people use during hiking. I don't know what's called properly, but so it took time. So this is how endless days ended up when you have to warm up water. There was no hot water in the cell, so if you have to warm up water every time in a metal cup with that, it takes time and your effort, and that kept me going. I talked to the guards if they wanted to talk to me. Sometimes the guards would come to the cell and ask me about life in Prague or in America. They will never ever travel in their lives, I was probably the first and the last one in that little city of Kazan they could talk to about that. They asked me about car prices, grocery prices, and some of them were more nicer to talk to, but they are very afraid and scared of each other. They report on each other a lot. They would never ever talk to a prisoner in front of each other. But the human interest was always winning, and they were small acts of kindness. Sometimes that there was a huge list of banned groceries. I don't know, Danny, did you have the same thing? There were like every week some groceries were banned. So when my friends and family brought me food packages, there was always something, there would be that something was banned. Like, for example, 1 month bananas were banned. So they had like nobody would answer the question why. And sometimes there was those small acts of kindness that one of the guards would bring me some banned product or something. Like that part, all people are people, they're humans, and that's hopeful. But what kept me going is my family. I knew I would return to them sooner or later, and I really wanted to return and be healthy and be able to continue what I was doing.
Danny?
Yeah, I think a lot of that sounds really similar. I mean, it's crazy thing about the guards, like they're working for the regime that not only are you, maybe angry at or upset with, but like, if you've been reporting on this country, you see how much destruction and how much evil that they're responsible for. And so these people work for them, but you realize how massive that bureaucracy and hierarchy is and how removed a prison guard that just, they lived on a compound that sort of their housing was supplied by the government, supplied by the state. They weren't like really in a position to agree or disagree or do anything about it. And some of them are, really mean, and then other ones are really, really generous, and they like, you know, sneak you. For me, I like really wanted to have chewing. I was so bored. I thought having chewing gum, at least chewing gum would be something to do. Like that was the level of boredom. And one of the guards brought me like a packet of chewing gum. He would also sometimes give me a pen, and like you're not allowed to have pen and paper, but it wasn't really enforced until, later on I kind of got in trouble. I got caught trying to sneak a note out, and then they really enforced it. But before that, sometimes a guard would help me, get a pen or something, which is like, and so you have these, and one of the guards, a lot of them, like what you were saying, Elsa, is like they are never going to leave the country. They're never going to leave that city. A lot of them are really curious though about the rest of the world. And so one of them really wanted to learn English. So we would have these like really base level, like sort of English semi lessons whenever we could get a moment or two, at the beginning or end of their shift. They're like, supposed to be the guard or whatever. And then they're trying to like sneak in lessons as a student. So it's really interesting. There's a million like little moments like that. But the thing about how to like sort of deal with your mentally and the boredom and all that, like for me also, it was knowing that I was waiting to see my partner, Juliana, and waiting to see my parents, and just knowing they were outside and thinking about that. It was books. Books were so incredibly important to me. And then meditation also, like it's not something I had ever done before, and it's not the sort of thing I would have been drawn to, but I learned a couple basic techniques in there, and that also became extremely important. And then I think other times you just don't really adapt or deal well. There's also long stretches of time where I just, wasn't doing great, and it's a level of sort of boredom and agitation that's like pretty hard to describe, but also nothing to be done about. So you just have to sort of endure it, and like, sometimes it'll pass, and then sometimes you'll get your hands on a book.
Absolutely.
Just a reminder, because I have some more questions about the time in detention, but as a reminder to our viewers and listeners, we're having a conversation, but let's open this up to everybody. If you have questions for Alsu or Danny, use the Q&A function on your Zoom page to send that question. I've got it up in front of me. It says no open questions right now. It frankly means we've had no questions from outside. But getting back to the discussion of what you did during the time you were in detention, Alsu, you said you subscribed to a newspaper. Danny, you said you read books. What newspaper? Which books?
Mm-hmm. My friends subscribed me to I think the last existing independent newspaper in Russia. It's called Собеседник, and they were recognized foreign agent last month. So when I was released, so that's beginning of the end for any media outlet in Russia. And I read the a couple of books about prisoners' experience from uh, big terror Stalin times in Russia. The memoirs really helped me to go through that experience. Um, the funny thing is that they were Orwell's books there, Orwell's, but I couldn't read them because it was all around me there. So those books are very well read when you are free, but when you are in prison, I think they just don't go well with the surroundings. I had really good books there. My friends were sending me books. Yeah, and I have a question to Danny and Steve. You probably so there are two main bills or laws, and two main charges that are brought up against journalists in Russia. Is it the same in Myanmar or any other country? So this is the foreign agent law and fake spreading fake news law. Is that the same situation? But after you answer the question about books, yeah.
Books. So on newspapers, I mean, I couldn't really subscribe to anything, but we did get like maybe 1 or 2 days late, we would get the state newspaper, but it's the government newspaper, and like it's a caricature of any like state propagandist paper. I mean, it was just so absurd. There were guys in prison who, hated the government, or were not fans of the military government, and then there were guys who were supporters of it. But universally, everybody would read it and just like figure out what was actually whatever wasn't in the paper. They could just speculate on whatever wasn't being covered because there's just nothing in that paper. So I don't know. It was funny to see like the local population reading the state paper and just nobody believing it, regardless of their political persuasion. For books, I mean, I could kind of send out some requests, but really I was kind of like pretty happy to read whatever was sent my way. But like, really long, involved, whatever was a long and involved book was always the best one because that would take up the most amount of time. So I read the two really big ones were like there's a book called Gödel Escher Bach, which is kind of a weird science book, science and philosophy book, about like philosophy of mind kind of. And then there's a novel, Infinite Jest, this like famously long fiction book. Those are the ones like they took up the most amount of time while I was there. But I tried to make a list. I mean, there's literally probably I think over 100 books, maybe 120 books that I read in 6 months. So I mean, it's just like anything because it was the entire day. It was, you wake up and you read for maybe 4 hours and you take a break and then read for another 3 hours. So books wouldn't not last very long, but everything, novel, biography, history, whatever. And the fake news law was a thing in Myanmar. They added a provision to an older colonial law to add in the term fake news, basically, to make it include that phrase. So that became a law. They were using a lot of older colonial laws that are just about incitement or sedition, that sort of thing. Yeah, there was also the foreign agents thing was not a thing at that time. But it did seem like a lot of things a year later, once Russia invaded Ukraine, they started ramping up laws about dissent. In a lot of them, it almost felt like they had used Myanmar as like a test ground. I'm not suggesting that this is the case. Just there were so many parallels, 1 year later. And there's also a lot of military weapon trade between the two countries. Myanmar purchases a lot of their military material from Russia. So it's not like those two aren't in conversation.
Also, one of our viewers has a question about while you were in detention, Alexei Navalny died. Did you find out about that? And how did you feel when you learned that this dissident, had died?
It was Friday night when I found out that he died, and actually, we didn't have TV that night, no newspapers, but that news spread along the prison very quickly. Everybody has had a thing to say, had an opinion about Navalny, and I couldn't talk to anyone, as I have been interrogated about Navalny already, and the interrogators asked me if I had connections to people, to Navalny offices, so I couldn't even talk about it. Later in that weekend and next week, I got more information on his death and what was going on from my lawyer. I was shocked, but I understood that anyone who was jailed in Russia could end up that way. It's not because nobody is trying to poison you in jail. Nobody is trying to, deliberately kill you. But getting into jail is almost like beginning of your dying. The conditions you are put in there, even if there is a toilet in the cell, that food they are giving, all that intimidation and pressure. And there was no physical torture against me, but I'm sure there is more physical torture against men prisoners. Those solitary confinements where people sleep without mattresses on the floors, that all gets you to imminent death. It's in the longer time you spend there, it's the risk of dying, the threat of dying is closer. So it wasn't a big surprise. It was sad news, very, very sad news.
Another question from one of our viewers this morning. This is for both of you. In terms of how the U.S. government handles hostage cases like yours, what's the first thing you think should change? And what obstacles do you see to changing that?
I can start. After I released, I learned more about what was going on behind my advocacy, and that I was designated wrongfully detained only on the last day before I was released. That wouldn't impact my release, as I was told, but I still don't know why it took so long to designate me. And I think the U.S. government should reconsider that rule, that order to designate journalists as wrongfully detained immediately. They should get their designation immediately. And it's not, I'm not calling only the US government, but all other Western governments to immediately designate their journalists wrongfully detained if they are detained doing their job. That's what I think. Otherwise, it's all on the advocacy team. My advocacy team, led by RFRL, external affairs team, was the best. They made a great coalition of government officials, the rights groups, news organizations, media and journalism community. It's always a solidarity. It's always a union it's a coalition of different powers to release a journalist or anyone wrongfully detained. This is how it should work. And we rely on that. We really, when we're doing our dangerous jobs, we rely on that.
Why is that important? Why is that designation significant?
Designation is significant for the official steps to be taken for being released. I guess that's the question to the lawyers and government officials. I'm not sure I'm like fully qualified, but it can speed up the release process and negotiations between the governments.
Danny,
Yeah, this is like, yeah, there's, well, just to add on that, the wrongful detainee like label, it's all like this whole sort of vocabulary that I did not want to learn about, and then learned a lot more about once I got home after all of this. But yeah, I mean, it's some, I don't know if legal is the right word, but it's some, once that determination is made, the government changes their policy and they become much more vocal and they become much more active. And, you know, I suppose it has to do with like they want to investigate, you know, they would want to bring home any citizen, but if a citizen did happen to break a local law, you know, that was a just law or something, they want to make sure they're not like just making demands or something. I'm not exactly sure. This has all changed in the last decade because this is becoming more common, you know, and they're, I think, they established this new office within the White House, this special envoy for hostages. So I mean, they are trying to adapt, but you know, it's a huge bureaucracy, and international law is a huge bureaucracy. And so like the one thing that Elsa, you were saying is about all these different groups that all kind of step in to play a role. Like when a government can't do one thing and an advocacy group can, or a independent law group can do something that this other state-based thing can't. Like there is an ecosystem that's working, and we all depend on all of that. But it is obviously really uncoordinated because this is still a new thing, and I don't think the legal infrastructure is in place. You know, I don't know if there's a treaty, an international treaty that people can immediately cite and say this is why, you know, you must release a journalist. I think we need to really build that infrastructure internationally. I'm not sure what the U.S. government should or shouldn't do, but this is obviously a transnational issue. You know, one reason that I think it's really important, that one question or one sort of pushback, I guess, I'll get from Americans who wonder why I went to this place or wonder why their tax dollars should go to, you know, any concern for a journalist somewhere of any country or free presses. People back in the United States are depending on reliable information about the world also. I mean, these things we live in a world where, you know, I mean, there is a moral imperative, I think, to care about the world beyond your neighborhood and your country. But also we live in a world that's just very interconnected, and the decisions you make are completely entangled with so much of the rest of the world. So you should have reliable information about the rest of the world. So we need this is not just a U.S. government issue. This needs to be like a sort of international scope, the way we deal with these things.
And of course, you thought about this while you were in detention, all of these processes while you were waiting to get the word that you were going to be released. That's probably a facetious question. How did you pass beyond the books, beyond the reading? How did you keep track of the amount of time you were in detention? You know, on day 25, on day 75, on day 200. Did you have a calendar? Did you have? How do you mark the passage of the days that you're not able to get outside and do things other people were doing?
This is such a good question. Calendars are not allowed in Russian prison. Watches and clocks are not allowed there. I learned to track the day by the sunlight going on my wall. And like I asked my lawyer to bring me some information from the internet. I read it. It was a very interesting thing to learn. But it was a kind of entertainment. But on the serious side, I kept a diary. I kept a diary, and I made myself a calendar. Then I learned about the time from the meals they were delivering. So it was the meals were delivered more or less exactly at the same time. So then we occasionally had a TV in our cell, and we played that guess game. Who would say the exact time before we turn on the TV? And I really like, if it's like 10 minutes to somebody would say 10 minutes to 3, quarter to 3, or like a quarter past 3, something like that. And then it was really nice to see how you sense the time, that feeling of time, that it increased really, how you sense it, how you process it, how you want to spend 30 minutes reading, and you set up your mind timer, and more or less you just do it. It was a really interesting waking up for me. The wake up time was 6 a.m. And after I was transferred to a big cell with 10 women, that waking up time was horror for me. Like 10 women get up at the same time, use one bathroom, there is a line. So I tried to skip that line, and I set my mind timer for 10 minutes earlier, though official were not allowed to get up earlier. But I did it quietly, and I would wake up 10 minutes before 6 every morning. Somehow I would. And I was very proud of myself. That was an interesting experience.
That must be the broadcaster in you, knowing a sense of time like that.
That was too. That helped me a lot, because I did live shows on the radio a lot years ago, and when you have 10 seconds till the end of the program, 10 seconds sometimes is such a long time to say so much information. Sometimes it's such a short time. So it's the sense of time is very important.
And Danny, how did you pass the time? How did you keep track of the days?
Just to reiterate, the experience of time, I've never had anything like that. The experience of time, the way it happens there, where you literally experience every second of the day of a 24-hour cycle over and over. A really, really strange kind of mind warping thing. But so time on the week and month scale, for me, was always I was much more eager to know the time of day, and it was harder to track the time of day. But you get little clues, I guess. The food, somewhat. I would end up waking up at the same time. Our cells would be opened at 7, but I would wake up every day at maybe 4:30 a.m. or something. In those hours when it was kind of dark up until 7, when they opened the door, I would wake up. I would have coffee. I would have to make instant coffee the night before and hope that it was still warm in the morning. But I would wake up really excited to drink the coffee before it got cooler, So I'd get up at 4:30 and slam this instant coffee I'd made the night before when there was warm water available. And then I would have these hours just by myself to read. I was in a small area with maybe throughout the period of time between 15 and 20 people. So it wasn't solitary that in that sort of way. But this was the time of day where it was, I would get sort of my most intense reading done, and I wasn't exhausted by trying to figure out what time it was and how much more of the day was left. Because I'd say the afternoons for me were the worst. The afternoons is when you've already exhausted your ability to divert your attention, or just try to whatever the longer the day would go, the more frustrated I would get. So I don't know. Each day was you have to reset how you're gonna time things. But in terms of it was weird about the figuring out mentally how to know what 10 minutes is going to be and what 15 minutes is going to be. I would run in a really tiny little circle over and over to do my exercises. And in the beginning, I would say, all right, I'll run for 10 minutes. And it might end up, I would check if I could check the time, it would be maybe 6 minutes. Maybe the next time it would be 14 minutes. And then slowly, somehow, I started getting to the point where I would run like exactly 10 minutes. Like every time when I would stop and watch it go from 9:59 to 10. Like you get this really crazy ability to get like an internal sort of thing going. But that was all on like the hour to hour sort of thing. The longer scale things was just like every morning you wake up and you say you're gonna do it. I have to do this again. And I wasn't really like noticing weeks and months other than like yesterday I did push-ups, so today I'm gonna do pull-ups. And then it's like that over and over.
So true.
Food.
Yeah.
Describe the types of food or what kind of food you got. I mean, was it the same thing every day, or did you have some days when you got a really nice meal and other days when it should have been fed to an animal?
Mostly the food they were giving me should have been fed to the animals. And even the guards admitted that. It was a rotation, morning porridges and sweet black tea. Lunches consisted of cabbage soup or cabbage soup. um, soup with pasta and 20 gram of meat with pasta or any form of grains or potato. And dinners were always about fish, like boiled fish. My cellmates used to say that, oh, I buy this for my cat, so something like that. And again, grains or potato. I recall only one delicious meal. I used to be vegetarian before I got to prison. I didn't eat meat, but I started eating meat to have at least some protein. I didn't enjoy it much, but I did eat it. And during Ramadan, the one Muslim society in Kazan brought halal meat to the prison kitchen to cook for prisoners. And they made a really good meal that day. It was lamb with vegetables, I believe. Stew. It tasted good. That was the only time I tasted something good. Otherwise, I relied on my food packages that I was getting from my friends. Some cheese, nuts, protein bars, and oatmeal. That was I was eating, and occasionally there were milk. Oh, there were no. I wasn't getting any eggs, milk, or butter because I was considered healthy. Those are the dietary restrictions only for those prisoners who have HIV and hepatitis and TB, I think. So I didn't get that. So I was craving eggs, really. I even exchanged packs of cigarettes for eggs for a couple of times. I felt bad about it, but that woman who really wanted cigarettes, she didn't care about eggs, so I went for it. Yeah, that's it. And I had a lot of canned fish from my friends. This is what I ate. Yeah.
Any?
Yeah, I had a lot of canned fish also. Actually, that was like the big I was always very excited when I could get extra canned fish. The food, I mean, the food was terrible. It's funny, I have like kind of a joke. Myanmar is an interesting place because it's in between India and Thailand, and these two incredible food cultures and two of my like favorite cuisines. And the food and the sort of traditional Myanmar curries. I mean, I have a lot of friends that would disagree with this, but nobody pines for Burmese food. I mean, it's just I never really enjoyed it even when I was outside of prison. So once I was in prison, like there was some like prison versions of curries that I already didn't like. And we got two meals a day. So we had one at about 9 a.m. and then one at like 3:30 p.m. And those were the two meals. And they sound similar. It was like the morning one was like a very thin kind of porridge soup of bean and rice. And then in the afternoon, we would get a curry that would either have a tiny bit of meat, uh, once a week, a tiny bit of fish, or just vegetables. Um, and I mean, I say, like I mentioned that, the taste and the quality of everything was really bad and disgusting. That being said, I remember having lots of meals that I really enjoyed because when the food did come and like my palate had adjusted and I was so hungry, some of those are like the best meals I've ever had just because when it came and I was eating when I was that hungry, I started really developing a taste and craving like the things that were around. We would take some of the canned fish and add it to whatever curries that they had. And some guys would have like extra like pepper or something to make it a little spicier. And like I started, waiting for 3:30 every day because I couldn't wait to eat this curry that I initially had hated. And the other thing that was getting sent in as a parcel was like apples, just regular red apples that I had not thought so much about before, but I just became completely obsessed. Like an apple became the most incredible thing I'd ever eaten at the time.
This has all been fascinating to be living inside your world for those months that you were in detention. I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask each other a question. Is there anything that Alsu you want to know from Danny and vice versa about your experiences?
I have a question, Danny. Do you have a feeling sometimes that your prison stories are not interesting to anyone, but we keep telling them just because we think we want to share?
Um, I think um I understand the when people want to hear about it, I understand. I think I would be asking people somebody in that had been through this, I would be just as curious as uh most people seem to be in my story. So I understand it. But then when you go through it and people are specifically when they say like how did you survive? Like what else are you gonna do? You know what I mean? Like it does seem like it's not as interesting in the sense that like I'm I was there and I was staring at a wall. I don't know how to make that sound dramatic and exciting. In like the question of like how do you survive it? Like you don't have any other choice. You would have also survived. So I do have that sort of sense, but I mean it does make intuitive sense. I mean, I think, you know, this is a thing like a lot of people have asked me about writing a book and I think I would like to, but I do have that sense of like, you know, it wasn't as having gone through it, I wonder if my story is gonna let them down on the excitement that they're hoping for. But I think I can understand why people want to hear about it.
I really feel like saying more motivational things, inspiring things, because one of my findings when I came back was that there is so much sorrow, there is so much uncertainty among some people. People are not all of them can enjoy and cherish what they're having because of certain personal reasons. I really want to help if anybody wants help from me, and
Mhm.
I want to support them on any level, personal, professional. When people want to talk to me, that's my feeling. Yeah, and just
Yeah.
yeah. And then when I share my stories, I really want them to be helpful, not something that
Mhm.
I want to share because I want to share, but something to people can get from my stories. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When I got back, there were a few journalists who had gone through this experience years before me that reached out that were extremely helpful. And I mean, I hope you're experiencing that as well. And if not, I'd be extremely grateful for the ability to connect you to people. And I'm also, whatever you think I can do for you, I'm happy to help in any way.
Thank you. I
But I
really
mean,
appreciate.
the one thing I think that I came out of it with was like a new sense of appreciation and gratitude for things that I had previously taken for granted. And when people do ask the story, I do try to mention that a lot. And I think that is something that like, that's a sort of a motivational or positive thing. I think that's worth sharing that people can probably take from.
I have two final questions. One should be pretty easy. Are either of you working on a book right now about your experience?
Yeah, I've started, but it's I have the probably common thing with other journalists when there isn't an editor shouting at me about the deadline. I have a amazing ability to keep putting things off. But yeah, I do have a big chunk of words there that I need to keep chipping away at.
I'm not there yet. I only have a wish.
Mm,
I hope I will do it. It's been less than 2 months, so and I'm traveling a lot. I feel like I will do it.
mm.
And this is a traditional question we ask at the end of every one of these webinars from the international community. What does press freedom mean to you?
Shall I start?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, press freedom is a precondition to the free world, to freedom, right? Something we cherish a lot. And but it's also responsibility. For me personally, professionally, it was always a responsibility. We journalists are in charge of bringing objective, fact-based information to the society. So it's very important. It's very responsible. It's dangerous, but it's as I said, very important. And we all have to think how fragile it is. We shouldn't take it as granted. It is something we have to fight for and respect.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think press freedom is a lot of things. It encompasses a lot of things. So any answer I give, it'll be partial. But I mean, among those things is sort of a prerequisite, not just to freedom, to all these other things, but sort of democratic society, but also just free inquiry in general, whether it's finding and reporting the truth or whether it's trying to get to truth. The ability to sort of criticize, the ability to ask questions openly, the ability to engage in a sort of free and open dialogue. Um, it's the only way we really have to sort of find truth, to improve society, to improve laws, to improve government. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, without that, you're just going to be stuck where you are. I mean, there's no improvement without free inquiry, free conversation.
I think every journalist who's on this call and everybody who may not be a journalist would agree, without the enlightenment that's provided by journalists doing the hard work in the field, very risky work in some places, that we would not have the democracies we enjoy today. I want to thank Alsu Kurmasheva and Danny Fenster for sharing your experiences today. You're a part of a very small club, if you will, a club that nobody really wants to be a member of. And you've maybe heroes to some people for what you survived, what you withstood, and what you're doing with those experiences today. So thank you on behalf of SPJ and the international community. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences today. I just want to remind everybody, if you're not a member of SPJ, you can join by going to spj.org. And if you want to be kept up to date on future international community talks such as this one, subscribe to the weekly Substack newsletter. Dan has posted the link for that, and you can search also the SPJ International Community on Substack. Thank you to both of you. Good luck. Stay healthy, stay well. And for everybody else, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah,